Good morning, everyone. We have quorum, so if you want to sit down, we can go ahead and get started. So good morning, everyone. I know I'm a new face. My name is Jennifer Williamson. I'm the Deputy Director of Mobility Planning at SANDAG. And as you know already, Councilmember Dwight Wooden has retired. So today I'm going to fill in the role as chair of the first part of the meeting until Keith is done, and then Keith will come on up and resume his chair responsibilities. So with that, first I want to ask our clerk, Francesca, if we have to confirm that we have quorum.
Thank you, Jennifer. We do have quorum today.
Okay. I'll now call the December 5th Shoreline Preservation Working Group to order at 11:32 a.m. And Francesca, you can go ahead and provide instructions on translation and public comment.
Thank you. Before I do that, if we could just take a moment to let the interpreter explain how the interpretation functions will work for today's meeting.
Announcement from interpreter. To use the interpretation feature, please scroll to the bottom of the Zoom screen where the meeting controls are. Click on the interpretation icon, world, and select English as your language. If you are joining through the Zoom mobile app, cell phone, tablet, etc., please press the ellipsis, then interpretation, and then choose your language. Finally, click on mute original audio to not hear the original Spanish low in the background. Headsets are available for interpretation. If you are in the meeting room, please check out a headset from the receptionist in the lobby. Aviso por parte del intérprete. Para hacer uso del servicio de interpretación, favor de desplazarse a la parte inferior de la pantalla de Zoom, donde aparecen los controles. Haga clic en el icono de interpretación globoterráqueo y seleccione Spanish, español. Si está utilizando la aplicación móvil de Zoom, celular, tableta, etc., presione los puntos suspensivos, luego interpretación y luego el idioma. Si no desea escuchar el audio original en inglés en el fondo, por favor seleccione Mute Original Audio, que es silenciar audio original. Contamos con auriculares disponibles para el servicio de interpretación. Si se encuentra en la sala de reunión, favor de pedir auriculares con la recepcionista en el vestíbulo. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I'd just like to take a moment to explain how public comments will work for today's meeting. So if you're a member of the public who is in the room and would like to speak, please fill out a speaker slip. They are available at the back of the room, and we will call on you by name when it is your turn to speak. If you're in the Zoom meeting, please use the raise hand function, and again, you will be called on by name when it is your turn. If you're calling in by phone, please press *9 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute yourself, and you'll be called on by the last 3 digits of your phone number. These instructions are also available on the cover page of today's meeting agenda, which can be accessed at sandag.org. And all comments, whether emailed to the clerk or live, will be made part of today's meeting record. Thank you. And Jennifer, I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, Francesca. So now on to item number 1, non-agenda public and member comments. Francesca, do we have any members of the public that want to speak?
Thank you. And I forgot to mention today's public comment period will be 2 minutes for each person. We have 2 speakers on this item. First, Tom Cook, and Tom will be followed by Catherine Rhodes. Tom, you can go ahead.
Hi, good morning. Can you hear me?
We can.
Excellent. My name is Tom Cook. I'm a longtime volunteer with Surfrider Foundation San Diego chapter and currently serving on its executive committee. I wanted to start out by commending this working group for its excellent last meeting this past September, where we were shown results from Regional Shoreline Monitoring Program. San Diego benefits greatly from this program, and it now spans multiple decades. And so we support its continuation and possible expansion, especially given its importance for providing data to inform projects like the upcoming RBSB3, which was also a highlight of the previous meeting. I admit I was a little surprised at the level of the economic benefit projections that were presented to the team, which exceeded $1 billion for the San Diego region. I would like to remind this group that surfing and the region's collection of surf spots are a significant portion to the economics driving our coastal communities. Surfrider San Diego was involved in surf spot monitoring for the RBSB2 project, and I hope that this is a continued part for RBSB3, and most new coastal construction projects are requiring something like this. Finally, given the size of these projections, economic projections, I hope that this group can work on ways to recoup that money into the regional shoreline projects. One area where I feel there is a restriction to projects like this is the availability of a barge that can support the project. Can SANDAG purchase a barge? Given Orange County's interest in partnering with the SANDAG projects, this may be a valuable solution to allow projects to have the flexibility to place sand during the time of year that the sand will stay in.
Thank you very much. Your time has expired. Our next speaker will be Catherine Rhodes. You can go ahead.
Wonderful. This is Catherine Rhodes. And, again, I'm asking for a meeting with Mario and legal counsel and the auditor regarding my 20-year-old seismic concerns. And so anyway, here's another 20-year-old funding solution for a lot of the things that you would like to do. This would actually give funding to the schools, UCSD and Scripps. And what it is National Marine Sanctuary status. And so what happened is when back when Santa Barbara, when they had their oil spills, they came up with this idea to stop the oil spills, and that's creating National Marine Sanctuary status where you can't have oil drilling in certain areas. And so what it does is it does so much. I was looking at this when I was working with the SEALs at Children's Pool and seeing how we could get a docent program. And we were told we can't do anything because, we can't help, we can't volunteer because we have no liability insurance for volunteers. And so through NOAA, they have a volunteer docent program where anybody could be volunteered. Like, let's just say people at Wild Coast. We could get everybody, this does so much. It would pay for all your tracer studies. It would pay for a lot of your all the things that you guys wanted to do. And so what it includes is scientific research within a national marine sanctuary. You already have all the scientific evidence needed. Only a report is required. And so what you have to do is you have to go to Scott Peters, and I talked to his office before, but I need somebody who's a champion. I can't and I also talked to the people at NOAA before because they're actually in charge of it, NOAA in by the border. But I need somebody to actually talk to me from SANDAG, so or anybody. If somebody could please contact me if you're interested in trying to get this so we could bring in some cash to San Diego. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes the public commenters on this item.
Thank you. Do we have any member comments? Yes, please.
Mitch Silverstein with Surfrider. I just wanted to second what Tom Cook said. He's a member of our chapter. He's on our executive committee, long time, oceanographer guy who knows his stuff. And he kind of got cut off, but he was, and I don't want to misrepresent him, but he's just mentioning if SANDAG or what possibility there is to buy a barge on the West Coast. And it reminded me that former chair Warden he'd brought that up more than once at these meetings in the past year or two. So I just thought I'd want to kind of second what Tom was saying and see. Again, I don't recall if that's ever been looked at by SANDAG or if that kind of official coordination of seeing if that's possible has ever been done. So I think that'd be a great subject for a future meeting. Thanks.
I can address that real quickly. So it is being looked at right now. It'll be part of the Regional Beach Stand 3 planning studies and feasibility studies, which will get presented to you in springtime. So there'll be a chapter on there of what we can do for long-term dredge. Is purchase really the best option, or long-term lease, or how do we maximize the potential there? So wait a couple months and you'll have.
Okay, now on to item number 2 on the agenda, approval of the September 5th, 2024 meeting minutes. Francesca, do we have any public comments on this item?
Thank you. I don't see any hands from the public.
Do we have any member comments? Nope. Do I have a motion to approve this item? Thank you. Do I have a second? Great, thank you. Please call the roll.
Thank
But-
you. Would you like to raise hands for this?
Yeah, let's just raise hands. I was like, roll, whoa. Yes, please. Raise your hand if you approve the minutes. Great, thank you. Looks like we had a unanimous approval. Now on to item number 3, Keith's item. First up, we have Keith to discuss the recommendations proposed by the Sediment Management Technical Task Force.
So good morning. I'm not Courtney Becker. You guys remember Courtney? She had her baby about 6 weeks ago. She's doing well. Her baby Eddie is fine, but she'll be back in January. So I'm going to give a presentation on the results of the Sediment Management Technical Task Force that we developed and some recommendations going forward. So just if you remember back in June of 23, the Shoreline Protection Working Group, we talked about establishing a task force to look at the oceanside littoral cell, which is shown in purple. And the idea was there's a lot of work being done in this oceanside littoral cell, and we wanted to have a better understanding of what the current science was for how sediment comes into the cell, where it moves, and where it exits the cell. So erosion and deposition of sand through this area. And we picked the ocean side as kind of a pilot project because we knew there was a lot of potential work being done. A lot of the SANDAG work to put sand up here, both through lagoon restoration projects. There's been, Oceanside has an active re-beach project that they're pursuing. And just the general erosion in this area is presented to be one of the hot spots. The oceanside littoral cell, remember, goes from Dana Point all the way down to La Jolla. But the findings of this task force probably can be used uniformly for all the 3 littoral cells. So this was a technical task force, and that's probably a new term for you. You're used to working groups, you're used to policy advisory committees, but a technical task force is just what it sounds like. It's a short-term, non-Brown Act technical group that meets around a specific topic for a specific duration of time. So this technical task force was made up of scientists from Scripps, engineers, professional engineers in coastal practices, our stakeholders, and many of you on this working group participated in one or more of the 5 meetings that they held. It was a specific dive into how the sand's moving and what we can do to maximize the sand on your beaches, which, as we heard about last time we met, is an economic windfall for the jurisdictions. It was coming out of the recommendation from the San Diego Coastal Regional Sediment Management Plan, which is a mouthful to say, but I'll explain it's one of the four foundational documents, policy documents that SANDAG has for shoreline management. So I'm going to take 10 minutes of your time and kind of go high level through the meetings. Your report has ample information if you want to get in details, or you can contact us afterwards. But it was like taking a master class in oceanography. I enjoyed it, and there was a lot of details there, but I have to appreciate all the speakers who helped us out. The first speakers we had, first in September 2023, we looked at where the sand was going in the watershed and what factors influence it. And so right now we had Nick Setterpohl of GHD, who's an engineering firm, and then Dr. Bill O'Reilly from Scripps present. Historically, about 50% of the sand that used to come down from the rivers and on their bluffs has been lost. So there's a deficit of sand into the system to start off with. And some of our coastal features, like the Oceanside Harbor, are further changing how sand would have moved historically. So from undergraduate days, you always hear about this river of sand concept, which the sand goes in one part of the watershed, it flows south into these underwater canyons. For the La Jolla here, it'd be La Jolla canyons, and then it leaves the system. So kind of a river of sand moving from north to south and then exiting. Dr. Bill O'Reilly has research to show that this is probably an overly simplistic model. And really what's happening is you have this sand moving into the watershed and moving sometimes south, sometimes north, back and forth until big events happen. So he's identified that there's actually like 8 different sub-watersheds occurring. And the watersheds, or the sub-watersheds, are basically from lagoons to lagoon to lagoon. You know, we have 6 different lagoons in the area up here. They act as kind of a compartment. During the big El Nino flows and the big atmospheric rivers, sand moves south, but in between those, it can move north. So it's a complex dance of how the sand moves around these watersheds, which will help us in terms of management of that sand. There's also swell dictates the direction, and the magnitude varies within these subcells. So what I found interesting is the oceanside compartment of that subcell has the least amount of southward flowing sand, which was fascinating to us because it helps us figure out how to manage sand better. The next meeting we had, we got Greg Heron, who has been an active speaker in this group for many years. He's looked at the 28 years of monitoring that the jurisdictions have paid for and what we can learn from that monitoring of keeping a sand on the beaches itself. So not surprisingly, Oceanside Harbor greatly influences this sand in this littoral cell. Without the U.S. Army Corps studied this, without the harbor, you get wider beaches. With the harbor, you get the retreat of beaches or erosion. Now, we kind of all knew that intuitively, but there's data now from the Army Corps that shows that. What to do about that's the big question. Some of the lessons learned, though, from beach nourishment, which Greg looked at is, and this is not shocking, this is just physics, the larger the grain size, it stays longer. The larger the fill, meaning the more amount of sand you place on it, it stays longer. The more frequently you put it on sand, it stays longer. And then some locations, they'll retain sand better than others, and it's not known why that is. So some of the areas along, you put the sand down, it stays for many years, others it just dissipates. So there's a very big information gap, which Mr. Heron suggested that we do a tracers study to help understand these areas that are kind of erosional, what's happening with the sand. The tracer study is really just taking this fluorescent, non-toxic sand, placing it out there, and then watching where it goes. It's been done all over the world. And in fact, now we had a presentation by a firm that does this, and the Army Corps is actually, in U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Los Angeles District is actually going to propose to do this. So we have to convince them to come down to San Diego and use some of those tracer studies. The third meeting we had focuses on some of the northern portions of the watershed up there in Dana Point, but also looked into some southern areas as well. And again, the main factor here was to say that a lot of the subcompartment cells are kind of being looked at and being implemented. This divergence of drift concept was just what we think the sand's doing versus what it's actually doing. And it can explain 73% of where the sand moves. The big takeaway, though, is that we have had a period now of increased erosion over the last decade. So why that erosion is happening and why we don't have more sand coming in is part of the factors of shoreline management, which goes into some of the policy decisions that this board will make. There's also, looking at some of these maps here, you see the big red marks there. Those are the areas where sand isn't retaining. And I think you all know that since it's San Diego beaches that are being affected. And the arrows show that the strong positive flows as opposed to the circles, which shows kind of diffusing of the sand itself. So think of strong versus weak. The fourth meeting, we actually met with the lagoon managers. So while sand is good on your beaches, sand in the lagoon is not good. If you get too much sand in the lagoon, it closes up the lagoon mouths, and that causes fish kills, it causes decreased species die-off from birds, and other kind of patterns and ecological damages. So there's a balance between how much sand you put on the beach and what you do to make sure that the lagoon mouths are actually open. We had 3 lagoon managers come talk to us about what we could do better. They said being involved early in the process was critical, figuring out how they can get streamlined a process to remove that sand if it gets in the lagoon mouth, and creating up some kind of funds to compensate. So if we put sand on the beach, making sure that it doesn't affect their lagoons and that there's a funding source to immediately move forward and remove that sand. So I think that's good lessons learned, and we actually involved them in the last regional beach sand project, and I think that would be big advocates for us in the future. The last meeting we had focused in on the policy documents, and in SANDAG we have 4 foundational documents that have been built since 1993, and let me get this right here because I don't want to misspeak on all this. The Shoreline Preservation Strategy was built in 1993, and it envisioned that it would be a big dump of sand of 30-40 million cubic yards of sand at once, and then annual placements of sand thereafter. So think of it as a big effort to put a lot of sand on the beaches and then annual maintenance, like creating a road and then maintaining that road over a period of time. Just for perspective, we haven't done that as a region. At the most, we've got about 3 to 4 million cubic yards, so a whole order of magnitude done over that period of time. So we haven't followed our plan, and there's some good reasons for that, both ecological, but mostly it's funding reasons. The next document was developed in 2001, and it was a sand retention strategy. And it said, well, in areas, the sand is not going to stay on your beach unless you do something about it. And there's different things to retain that sand. And it suggested that we do a pilot project in the region. It said, well, we understand there's some negative effects about doing structures, hardened structures on the ocean, but there's also some positive about retaining that sand and creating new habitat. And it suggested we do a pilot project to look at that area. In 2006, the jurisdictions wanted to have one regional permit, one process for getting opportunistic sand on their beaches. So when you're doing a development, or like in this case, SANDAG was developing some of the I-5 projects, sand is available. And they wanted to have the ability to quickly move to the beach where it would be most valuable, as opposed to moving it offshore or moving it to landfill or using it for something else. So SANDAG created this, I'll get the name right here, the Sand Compatibility and Opportunity Use Program. So this was every jurisdiction would have their own permit to go out and place sand on the beaches as the opportunity arose. Some of those jurisdictions have maintained those permits, and some of those permits have been expired in other jurisdictions. The final plan was the Regional Comprehensive Regional Sediment Management Plan. And it also kind of highlighted the area to put a lot of sand on the beach, in this case, 30 cubic yards to restore the beaches. So you need a whole bunch of sand to restore the beaches. And then you need about 400 cubic yards annually to maintain it. So the analogy I'll give you in other infrastructure is we go out and build roads, but we just don't walk away from those roads. We maintain those roads. It's the same thing with the regional beach sand. You want to put the sand on the beach, but then you want to maintain it so they keep it up. So I thanked all the audience, the members of the task force and the presenters. What are we doing with this information? What's the next steps? So here's the recommendations from the task force that I'm bringing back to you. One is that we take these 4 complex old documents and combine them into one updated shoreline policy documents. One plan that will dictate how shoreline management should be done for the region. That we, in that document, the updated document, reflect the current science and identify the data gaps and how to fill those gaps. We use the regional beach sand 3 studies, which I just mentioned prior to the start of this presentation, to update the nourishment and sand retention strategies. How can we better manage the sand in the region? What do we need to do that? That we look at nourishment programs is not a one-off project. So SANDAG on your behalf has done 2 nourishment projects. We cobble together funds every 10 to 12 years. We do a project, and then we seem to walk away from it. Instead of doing that, we do a cycle or a program of nourishment efforts. And I know that funding will be challenging for that, but that's a way to really kind of better manage the resources we have out here. To help us as SANDAG create this new updated policy, I'm proposing a science and engineering task force to guide the plan's development. And then we include our Southern California peer agencies as advisors. So since this watershed, our watersheds go all the way up to Dana Point, we've included San Clemente, City of San Clemente, Dana Point, and the County of Orange to participate. And I think that's a great way to kind of learn from our peers up there and also kind of develop synergies between us. So the other recommendations to seek funding to perform a sand tracer study, which I mentioned. The Army Corps is already pursuing that, so we should be lockstep with them to find out where they're going to place the sand and how we can best utilize the information. To take all the information we currently have over the 28 years of SANDAG and to take scripts and SANDAG data together and combine it into a data portal. We're already putting that kind of concepts together, working with scripts, and I think there's a lot of information out there that would be better utilized in an interactive online data form than a static report, which we give you every year. The final 2 items were to develop a regional consensus to install and monitor at least 1 pilot sand retention project. So as I mentioned, our policy said we should look at a pilot program. We should select that pilot program that is adaptable, that is removable, but it's also a way for the region to say, let's move forward and figure out how to better manage sand. And we can talk about what the best locations are about that shortly. The final thing came up was the development of maintaining a regional scoop permit. It makes no sense for each of your jurisdictions to have a scoop permit and maintain it on your own. Why not just develop one for the San Diego region? So the recommendations that came out of the task force, the next steps for us is to develop this into our budget. So right now, SANDAG is working on our budget for next year. I'm incorporating these recommendations and assigning staff with hours so we can actually pursue this. And of course, the next thing is always finding funding. We're continuing looking for grant funding and federal and state funding for this program. That concludes my presentation, and I'd be happy to answer your questions. Sure.
Do we have any public comments on this item?
Thank you. We do have 2 public speakers on this item. Jamie Timberlake will be first, followed by Catherine Rhodes.
Jamie Timberlake, and I'm the Coastal Zone Administrator for the City of Oceanside. I just want to take a moment to say how much we appreciate SANDAG's leadership in forming the Sediment Management Technical Task Force. This group brought together an array of practitioners and experts with elected representatives, and this gave us all a unique opportunity to build regional dialogue and identify pathways for building coastal resilience. So I just want to begin with applauding SANDAG on this effort. As far as the task force recommendations, Oceanside strongly encourages SANDAG to formally select the Rebeach Oceanside project as the regional sand retention pilot project. Adopting a pilot project to test sand retention was one of the key recommendations coming from the task force. This designation of Beach as the pilot sand retention project aligns with previous SANDAG policy documents that identified Oceanside's coastline as one of the most suitable sites for a pilot retention project. The City of Oceanside has already made significant investments in understanding the technical aspects of sand retention, and we've made major progress on building regional consensus on our approach. Over the past 2 years, we have by and large gained local and regional consent on the design and will spend the next 2 years refining it through modeling and engineering. We fully recognize concerns about potential downdrift impacts and any impacts on surfing and the ecosystems, and thus we have committed to focusing our efforts on baseline monitoring and a robust adaptive management plan to guide management through implementation and beyond. Oceanside is the furthest along in California in designing a pilot retention system. We've received supported participation from the Coastal Commission, their staff, and their executive director, and from the State Coastal Conservancy. And we've initiated discussions with the Ocean Protection Council on their newly initiated California Artificial Reef Program. In short, we feel extremely well positioned to serve as the pilot project for SANDAG, and we encourage you to select Beach Oceanside as your regional sand retention pilot project.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Catherine Rhodes. You can go ahead.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And first, I wanted to thank Keith Greer for answering my questions last time. That confirms that any sand from any tunneling project for the through Del Mar will be placed in the Oceanside littoral cell. That's great. So thank you for confirming that. And so anyway, when I saw about these meetings, of course they look so good and they're not Brown Act or anything like that, but they seem to have such wonderful information. I don't know if you recorded them, but if you could, maybe if you could put them on YouTube, so people like me that would be interested, specifically in all this great information could see all the things you did. So anyway, I wanted to mention, on page 17, it talks about, why the La Jolla subreach is so stable, and it's because of bluff erosion. But how much bluff erosion happened, along toward Pine State Beach? I know before, I've seen different things where Scripps and UCSD have all this information from LiDAR, radar and stuff like that actually shows how much sand was collapsed. So it would be great if you guys could communicate with each other to know exactly what it is and then put it in your report so we could have additional information. And, I'm really big about how you guys have all this great information for the Oceanside littoral cell, but nothing for our Mission Bay littoral cell, especially for La Jolla and Pacific Beach, where we have all these bluff failures. And then also bluff failures has nothing to do with the sediment management, but it really does. And so I was wondering if you could, if you had more money, of course, if you could just expand it more within the Mission Bay cell. And I think all this information is so great. So thank you so much for all this great info. Thank you. Bye.
That concludes the public comments on this item.
Thank you. Do we have any member comments? Yes.
Thank you. That was riveting, Keith. I enjoyed learning so much in the time that I've been gone on my maternity leave, coming back and seeing how much knowledge has been acquired. There's Courtney and her baby. Welcome.
Oh, there goes the meeting now.
And I think that this technical task force, is that what it's called, is a really important, it's a really important group of stakeholders that you've convened that provide knowledge that is otherwise not available to the resource into the region in such a cohesive manner. So I would support the continuation of this technical task force so we can continue the studies and learning about all the different regions and how we're all working together. And I'm supportive too of the comments that as laid out in the management guidelines that we have a pilot project. And I think that the Oceanside project is a perfect project for that to be the regional pilot.
More comments? Thank you. Can you go ahead and state your name for the record as you give your comments?
Eric Joyce, Oceanside. Thanks again, Keith. This has been such a fun rabbit hole to get down into and, and crawl our way out of over the last year plus. And I have really appreciated understanding what the decisions ahead mean for all of our cities, both economically and ecologically, that we've taken that on here. I'm really thankful for it. I think this is a great approach just in general to the way that we should be governing across the board and many other aspects. I really appreciate the recommendations. I would again back up what you heard from our coastal manager, that Oceanside has really tried to do the work of creating a project that's both conscientious to the citizens of Oceanside, but also to the region in general. And looking at our project as something that can be removed, that is strategically placed, that it would actually give the information we want everybody to have when we walk away from that first pilot of like, is this something that others can use in this fight that we all realize is so important. So I would really hope that Oceanside is that first option, and we would obviously be really willing partners going forward. I would also like to say, just because I saw the words on the tracer program, and I think what's great about this entire project has been, it's about information, about getting good information. And I don't think we should lose the sight of continuing to gather more information and using all the tools that we can available. I would just want to remind, from my understanding, and of course, making any kind of scientific declaration in this room is a dangerous proposition for me, so I'm stand to be corrected. But a tracer study is really showing what happens to sand at any given moment, at any given stretch of beach, and that all of the conditions that are happening at that moment are the only way to predict exactly what will happen with that sand again. And so while it is, I think, very interesting information, I just want to be careful about stating that we're going to do a tracer study and then we're going to know what happens with sand on our beaches, because it really is defined to this limited scope of when you do the tracer study and what the conditions are. So I'm excited for the future, and I really appreciate all the work that everybody has done to get here. And I appreciate the scientists who have been patient with us asking our elementary questions, and thanks. Looking forward to the work.
Hi, Eileen Maher with the Port of San Diego. One of the recommendations was for a regional permit to do the work, and I think that's extremely important, that and the permit conditions be as broad as possible. I know Imperial Beach's conditions were pretty limiting, so I think a region-wide permit with broader options and more material accepted on an annual event would be very important.
Does that complete our member comments? Oh, yes, one more.
Thanks, Keith. That was really interesting. And I thought that sediment management task force was some of the most interesting meetings for sure of the year. I just wanted to second what Ms. Timberlake and Councilmember Hinsey and Councilmember Joyce said about Re-Beach, leaving surf riders' opinions on sand retention to the side. Re-Beach, it is already hit the ground running. So I think that makes sense for that to be the pilot rather than trying to come up with a different one in a different place in San Diego County, especially since it's in the Oceanside littoral cell, which has been subject of so much of these studies. I guess I'm curious, like, what does that mean? If SANDAG or this group votes to select Re-Beach as their endorsed pilot retention study, I guess, what does that actually mean? Like, does that mean funding? Does that mean, yeah, that's my question. Thanks.
So let me preface this by saying in March, we're going to have our meeting and we're going to have Jamie come and give a presentation on the Re-Beach project, kind of the status and next steps. What it means if SANDAG endorses that project is that we come behind it for seeking funding with Oceanside. So it's a hand in glove type of thing where we both kind of advocate for the project. It makes sense if we go forward that way, as opposed to seeking some funding for something else.
That appears to conclude this item, and I am going to bow out and let Keith bow in. So appreciate your patience with me today. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you. I say it's weird being in this seat. I have never sat in this seat in SANDAG. I've been in 18 years, so I appreciate it. Next on the agenda, on item number 4, we have the state of California, Justine Kimball coming from the Ocean Protection Council to talk about the latest guidance on state of California sea level rise guidance 2024 science policy. Justine will have a hard stop at 12:30, so I just want to keep that in mind that we have her till 12:30, and then she turns into a pumpkin and goes away. But Justine, can you hear us?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Perfect. It's turned over to you. Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks. Yeah, our sea level, you can go to the next slide, actually. I might be a little rusty here. Our sea level rise guidance was adopted in June, so I actually haven't done a presentation on it in a little while. So for those of you who aren't familiar, the Ocean Protection Council was enacted in 2004, and our OPC Executive Director serves also as the CNRA Deputy Secretary for Ocean and Coastal Policy. We have a mission to ensure California maintains healthy, resilient, productive ocean coastal ecosystems for the benefit of future generations. We have a strategic plan that has 4 goal areas, our first being safeguarding in the face of climate change, and providing best available science on sea level rise and coastal resilience topics is one of the priority focus areas within our strategic plan. Next slide. And so this is the 4th iteration of the sea level rise guidance. It's an update to the 2017-2018 guidance documents. That was separated into 2 separate documents. The science, the modeling update portion was released in 2017, as well as a repeat of the science, but the policy portion in 2018. That guidance included sea level rise projections for 12 tide gauge locations across the California coast. Those were probabilistic projections with both high and low emission scenarios going out to 2150, as well as an extreme scenario like the doomsday glacier scenario that called the H++. It also provided a stepwise process for how a given location would select a sea level rise projection based on risk tolerance to use that sea level rise, those sea level rise values in planning and projects, as well as recommendations for adaptation planning. Next slide. So for this iteration, the iteration that was released in 2024, like I said, it was adopted at the June council meeting in 2024. We convened a science task force to lead the science portion of it. For this 2024 update, we actually combined the science and policy into one document. So unlike the 2017-2018 that was split with the science update and the policy separate, this is one document. So I'll go through so you can see the chapters here. The asterisks of chapters 2 and 3 are really the science portions of the document, and those were task force authored by this esteemed group of scientists you can see listed here. And then chapter 4 is the policy guidance for how we are recommending selecting and using that new science in planning and projects, and that was authored by OPC as part of that document. Next slide. So I'm not going to go too much into the weeds on the science. Like I said, that was led by the task force, and you can see our recording at the June council meeting for a really great overview of that by Ben Himlington, which was our lead modeler at NASA JPL, and Patrick Barnard for chapter 3 on the other coastal hazards. So this is just sort of a summary of the new projections. It is a different modeling methodology than the 2017-18 guidance. Rather than probabilistic projections, we're using a scenario approach to align with the national report. So there is a little bit of different language switch here. And so this is just a summary of, the low to intermediate span versus the higher projections. And then there's an explanation in the guidance of how to interpret all that. Next slide. Like I mentioned, chapter 3 is the combined impacts of sea level rise and other coastal hazards, authored by the task force, with these key takeaways here. But I will go to next slide. Try to be time efficient here. So this is the guidance that that OPC authored. It is again a stepwise process for selecting sea level rise values for planning and projects. We did add a step there. Step 5, I believe. I have some slides that walk through the steps. So our policy guidance is to use the most precautionary approach is to evaluate both the intermediate to high scenarios, plus 100-year storm conditions in planning and projects. Like I said, there's more detail in the document about this. But we also recognize that the process for selecting an implementation project to a certain amount of sea level rise will include consideration of many factors, including a risk assessment, and we have some risk assessment language in there as well. And we again recommend adaptation pathways and trigger-based adaptation planning that is in a phased approach. Next slide. So steps 1 and 2, I'll go through this quickly, are the same as in the previous guidance to identify where your location is and what planning horizons that you would be using for your given application. This guidance is a little bit different in that we provide both statewide values, which assumes essentially 0 vertical land motion, as well as tide gauge specific values that incorporate vertical land motion, as well as methodology for incorporating local vertical land motion values into the statewide values. So there's a couple of different options there for getting your local sea level rise values. If you don't have significant subsidence or uplift, this is likely not going to be a consideration for your given location. Next slide. So steps 3 and 4, again, the intermediate to high scenarios plus storms are recommended, but we also recognize that a lot of previous work can be used, like you can do a crosswalk with sea level rise values you've used before, and a lot of them have stayed the same, just sort of shifted in the years. So we provide some guidance on how to do that crosswalk. And then step 4 is essentially the vulnerability assessment step. But again, if you've already done a vulnerability assessment, we highly encourage, leveraging all work that's been done to date. Next slide. And step 5 is new in terms of exploring adaptation options and feasibility, realizing that once you're at a vulnerability assessment stage, you're likely not ready to just jump right into projects, and you have to really do an assessment of what is possible in a given location. That's really a process of working with the community and stakeholders and engineers on what is possible. And then once you have your suite of options, again, we have a sort of a risk assessment framework for how you could go about selecting what your option is. Next slide. So that's the overview of the guidance. It's really an update of the 2018. It's not significantly different. It's just newer science and some slightly tweaked policy guidance to hopefully be more streamlined. And then I wanted to highlight a funding opportunity that OPC has under Senate Bill 1 to fund the development of sea level rise adaptation plans, as well as the process to get to that in terms of like data collection, vulnerability assessment, community visioning, and engagement. The FY 24-25 budget maintained $77 million in funding for the SB1 grant program. Plus, we have new Prop 4 funding. There is about $38 million available now, and yeah, that grant program is currently active, and we have guidelines for that if you go to our website. Next slide. So I think, yeah, these are just the phases that I mentioned. We have a pre-planning phase, a data collection phase, and a planning phase that is open right now. So we're just really focused on the planning for sea level rise right now. We do have, that's our track 1. And then we are working on opening up a track 2, which would be the actual implementation projects in probably mid 2025, but we do have an opportunity now for any urgent projects, not wanting to slow down already identified projects that could lose momentum or there's just an urgent need for. We do have a pathway for those urgent projects right now, but we are focused on the planning phases. Next slide. And yeah, so this is just a little bit more about the funding opportunity. It's rolling quarterly applications. It's non-competitive, meaning that we have eligibility criteria built into our solicitation information. And so if you meet those criteria for the different phases, you would automatically move forward towards funding. And that we do that in a rolling quarterly process. We are now just on Monday, we are bringing, I believe, our fourth round of projects, fourth quarter round of projects to the council meeting. So it's just an ongoing process. These are the eligible applicants here. The way that Senate Bill 1 is written, it's very constraining towards really focusing on the local and regional governments. That's the language in the bill and supporting that planning process. Next slide. And then, as I mentioned, we are expecting to launch our track 2, which is our projects in early to mid 2025. That will be a competitive application process. So we will have, 1 or 2 requests for proposals and a competitive scoring review panel as part of all of that. And meanwhile, the rolling planning applications will continue. Next slide. Highlighting that we launched our first technical assistance program as part of the SB1 program. So this is complimentary, and it's based on applicants' needs, and there's a criteria for who our TA provider can help support, but it can help support communities that are under-resourced, things like that, at all stages of the grant process, from really scoping a project to actually helping with like editing and writing and submission of a proposal. And we work really closely with our TA provider as those projects come through that pathway as well. And again, all that information is on our website. Next slide. And that's it. Thank you. And yeah, I have 9 minutes for questions.
Thank you, Justine. Francesca, do we have any public comments on this item?
Yes, thank you. Catherine Rhodes, you can go ahead.
Oh, wonderful. This is Catherine Rhodes, and thank you very much for that presentation. I was going to say, here in San Diego, we really do need state help for engineering solutions for areas of former salt marshlands, including areas in the port for the Midway area and for SANDAG's airport connectivity project. What I always recommend, of course, is my La Playa plan, which is an adaptive plan for sea level rise. And what would be is a series of bathtub foundations that would get rid of the seismic hazard of liquefaction. And so, you know, bathtub foundations are, have been used at the World Trade Center in New York City. That's the one everybody knows about. But here in San Diego for the Navy Broadway complex, they have one. They're planning one for Seaport Village, for the county administration office, for port headquarters. All those actually have exactly what I'm talking about. And so what I'm asking for is for in the city of San Diego, the only engineering solution for sea level rise we have in areas of salt marshlands with the low water table is porous pavement. And so I think that the state should come and actually give us guidance and have the guidance go through SANDAG so that when people build, you know, projects like, let's say, high-rise buildings, they're planning to build them on piles. When we have a low area to good formational material, that would be cheaper. And what we could do with that is create space that we could use for a whole bunch of things, including transit. And so one of the things for SB1 funding, if SANDAG doesn't have a project, I would say put the airport connectivity project there, because what you could do is if you actually created a 40 by 40, you know, for every, let's just say, 1 mile, you know, you could get like 300 cubic yards of.
Thank you. Your time has expired. Our next speaker is Bob. You can go ahead.
All right, good afternoon. Hey, thank you so much for the presentation and update on all of that with the OPC SB1 stuff, and having firsthand encountered your folks' TA, it's amazing and it's very helpful in getting things along. I do have a question on track 2. Will that be available for, say, nature-based projects such as nourishment for a community that is in dire need of it?
We have not developed our guidelines for it. So that is under active consideration. We will be prioritizing, you know, green nature-based strategies, but green, gray, and beach nourishment will be are being considered right now. We just don't have the final language at this time, but it's definitely a possibility.
Great. And one follow-on question to that. So if a community deems that they have an urgent need, they could apply for an urgent request for a grant consideration early this coming year?
They could right now. Yeah, there's a letter of intent process on our website that describes how you would submit an urgent project request.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Justine, and for everything you do up there at OPC. Really appreciate it.
Yeah.
And that concludes the public comments. Thank you.
Thank you. How about member comments or questions? None? All right. Justine, thank you very much. We appreciate you presenting remotely. I hope you have a good rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye.
The last item on your agenda, item number 5, is an overview of the City of San Clemente's Beach Nourishment Project update and their half-cent sales tax funding measure. We're fortunate enough to have our members from Orange County come to talk to it today. The idea is here is to learn lessons from our peer agencies working around California and have an understanding so you can possibly use this in your local jurisdictions. So today we have the city manager, Andy Hall, who's no stranger to SANDAG or San Diego, and Ms. Leslie Meyerhoff, who's also no stranger to San Diego. Both of them have worked in San Diego County for many years, but today they're representing the city of San Clemente. Leslie?
Thank you so much, Keith, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you to give you some updates on what we're doing in the city of San Clemente. Any opening remarks, Andy? Okay.
Let the experts. I've learned that.
Thank you. Appreciate that. So we've been asked to give updates on a couple of projects, including North Beach Emergency Sand Placement Project, the recently completed Army Corps of Engineers project, and also Measure BB, which is the half-cent sales tax for better beaches. So starting with the North Beach Emergency Project, Since, the city of San Clemente is technically outside of the San Diego County region. For those of you who don't know, it's the southernmost city in Orange County. It's got a population of about 65,000 people. The city is bounded on the south by Camp Pendleton and bounded on the north by Dana Point. So the city has about 5 miles of shoreline, about 15 public access ways to the beach. And one of the most popular beaches in the city is North Beach. It is the location where we have a train station. There's a public parking lot. The building that you can see in this photograph is used to be a concession stand. It's also got public restrooms. It's now being used by marine safety personnel and park rangers. So it's an important critical public infrastructure building. And this spring, when the sand would typically be on the beaches, there was literally no sand. So you can see in the bottom photo there was simply just cobble on the beach. So this beach really reached a tipping point, a critical mass where there was no sand to protect the infrastructure on the beach. So the city council directed staff and contractor, me, to begin to formulate a plan to find sand in an expedited manner and deliver that sand to the beach. So I'm happy to say we were able to do that. And the project was developed in part with the County of Orange. They provided free sand to the city from the Santa Ana River. So we received expedited approvals from the regulatory agencies to place up to 50,000 cubic yards of sand on the beach. And we used a previously permitted scoop sand placement footprint, and that helped our expediting process to get the sand to the beach. I also want to point out that the project not only benefited the city's beach itself, but also benefited the low sand rail corridor. And approximately 1/3 of the southern area of the footprint where we place sand is also protecting the railroad and is within their identified reinforcement areas 1 and 2. So, so a multi-benefit project. We were able to place 37,000 cubic yards of sand this past summer. We delivered the sand to the beach via trucks, Super 10 trucks with a 10 cubic yard capacity. Because we were placing sand on the beach in the summertime, we restricted our sand placement operations to Monday through Thursday only and reopened the beach to the public on Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays. And we did manage to obtain all available beach quality sediment from the Santa Ana River. So we did pre-construction and post-construction monitoring for all the standard requirements, including water quality, surf monitoring, bird and grunion monitoring. And the total project cost for this project, it was approximately $2 million of city funds. That comes down to about $54 a cubic yard. And keep in mind that is, this was free sand, so there was no actual cost to acquire the sand itself. It was opportunistically being made available for beach sand placement. So just a couple of before and after photos here. Pretty remarkable difference where we were in, I think that was probably June with the cobble, and then when we completed the project in October. This is the final photo. And this is the beach in October and November. So looking pretty good. The second project that I'm going to talk about is the Army Corps of Engineers and City of San Clemente and State Parks funded project. This is a 50-year project, very similar to what Solana Beach has and what Encinitas has. And actually we're also completed this year. So as most of us know, getting these projects to fruition took a lot of hard work, a lot of perseverance, and ultimately securing significant amounts of funding to get the sand onto the beach. So this project in San Clemente is 200,000 cubic yards of sand. Solana Beaches was 700,000 cubic yards, and I think Encinitas was 340,000 cubic yards. So just for relative comparison's sake. Our project in San Clemente is centered on the city pier, which is approaching its 100th year anniversary pretty soon. We added 50 feet of additional beach width to the center of the city. This project had a few stops and starts, which I've highlighted in this slide. We started the project in November of 2023. The dredge pipe was landed on the beach. The contractor came to the city and started to acquire material from the borrow site off of Santa Margarita River. Unfortunately, they hit cobble and were not able to get to the sand that the experts say is there. And so we had to take a pause. The dredge contractor then left San Clemente, went to Solana Beach and started the Solana Beach project. Then they completed the Encinitas project. And then they came back to San Clemente in April. What we had to accomplish between the time they left in January and the time they came back in April was additional CEQA and NEPA permitting, as well as identification of a new borrow site. So it took really just a lot of effort, a lot of teamwork, a lot of collaboration with city, federal entities involved, and the state entities involved in order to make this project a reality. So we did use a second borrow site at Surfside Sunset, which is northern Orange County. We brought the dredge contractor back in May. They placed 114,000 cubic yards, which was not quite half of what the project was permitted for. The contractor had to leave because they had other project commitments. So they left to work on some other projects, and then we brought them back in November. And I'm happy to say that they did complete the project. They delivered all the sand the city was expecting and paid for. And you can see the before and after here. Again, pretty remarkable difference what sand does for a beach. Just a shot of what it looks like when sand is actually being pumped onto the beach via hydraulic pipeline. And the last presentation I'm going to give to Andy Hall. This is our Measure BB.
Yeah, it's great to be here and see some familiar faces in a familiar room. And Keith's never looked better up there. You know, I'm just telling you, he looks fantastic. He might be getting illusions of grandeur at this point. But I wonder why he asked me to talk about this. It must be his therapeutic way of helping me deal with PTSD. So our city council decided to go after a targeted measure rather than a general tax measure, which of course requires a 2/3 vote. And our survey said that we would end up about 65 or 66%. We ended up at about 64 or 65%, which was about 1.5% less than what we needed to be able to pass the tax. But the proponents of the tax, if you're familiar with San Clemente at all, it's a very conservative community. Most of the proponents were hoping to get 50%. They didn't think that they would get anywhere near 60%, and they ended up getting 64.6%. So I think that they are excited about the possibility of maybe running that as a citizens initiative. Of course, a citizens initiative would only require a majority vote. And the reason for that is because it's more than just sand in the city of San Clemente. I think that that's really important. We have some critical infrastructure along the beach that we need to protect. We have the T Street Bridge that is certainly aging. I think probably you saw in one of the landslides recently, we lost part of the Mariposa Bridge, so that the two areas of the public beach in San Clemente are no longer connected. You can't get there because of the water now goes right up to the revetment. The beach has been washed away and the trail is gone. And so there's a lot of deferred maintenance that needs to happen as well. And so I think people in San Clemente, of course, are very coastal centric. They claim to be the surfing capital of the world. So does Huntington Beach, and so does Santa Cruz, and so does Imperial Beach, for that matter, when I was there. But the reality is we will say that we claim more professional surfers than any other community in the world. And Trestles is, of course, in San Diego County, is the best wave in the world. So it's really, really important. It's an important part of our economy. Rip Curl is, of course, in San Clemente, and some of the other businesses are really beach centric, and so it's really important to us. San Clemente has never done beach management in the past. In the entire history of the city, we've placed 17,000 cubic yards of sand on the beach prior to this year. And this year we did about 250,000 cubic yards of sand. So it was really important to us because we've really lost our beaches and they are in critical condition. But it's not just about the city of San Clemente. I know for SANDAG, I know you're very aware of what's happening with the Lausanne, the rail corridor. It's been shut down for the last 3 years. It's been shut down a full year in the city of San Clemente, and that's caused a lot of issues. So we're trying to find a way to not only help our beaches, but to stabilize the tracks. And I think there might be some pictures. Wow, this is really fancy stuff for an old city manager. Oh, see, I've almost pushed the wrong button. But you can see that the sales tax measure there, it almost passed. I think that it's clear in a very conservative community like ours to have 65% of the people say that they would tax themselves is I think was a little bit surprising to all of us, but it shows how important it is to our community. This is some of the beach restoration that we've done over the last little bit, and I think you've already seen a couple of pictures of that from Leslie, but this is the picture I wanted to get to. So I don't know if you can see it, but the top pictures, the one on the left and the one on the right, show the train on the tracks. And you can see that says 2008 and 2021. I actually have a picture from 2017, and the beach was exactly the same in 2017 as it was in 2008. So it only took between 2017 and 2021 for that beach to be completely eroded. And what I think we've convinced OCTA, which is Orange County Transit Authority, I think what we've convinced them is that the best way to protect the railroad tracks is with sand. I think prior to this, they had continued to improve the revetment, or at least because they could get emergency permits from the Coastal Commission, that was the preferred strategy to protect the trains on the track, was to continue to put rocks on the revetment. But the only way that I've been able to, in the years that I've been a coastal manager, the only way I've been able to see water be pushed to the west is sand. And you can see that here. And I think that the best way to protect the railroad tracks, of course, is sand. So we hope that we can all work together. We really appreciate that we've been included in the RBSP3 program. That's going to really, I think, help all of us. These things like railroad tracks and the environmental issues and other things that are happening don't recognize the difference between Orange County and San Diego County lines. We are all in the Oceanside Bight, and it's important that we work together, so we really appreciate that. But I don't know if you have any questions about a tax measure. We lost, but we came really close, and a majority of the people wanted to see it happen. So we were pretty... I think it does show how important it is, though, and we went out and hired the best, as you know. We went out and hired the best people we could get to help us with our coastal issues, and it's really, really important to our community. So you may not realize it, but it was really, really an important day, and you all got a standing ovation for including us in the Regional Sand Nourishment Program. It was really, really important that we be included because San Clemente is in an awkward place. I think all of you are familiar with the geography. It's not really Orange County and it's not really San Diego County. And so it was really important to be included in this because we get left out of some of the regional things in Orange County because the population center is primarily north of our community. So unless there's any questions for us, we really appreciate the opportunity to come down and talk to you all.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Francesca, do we have any public comments on this item?
Thank you, Keith. We don't have any public comments.
Okay. Member comments, questions?
I'm so sorry. One hand just went up. Would we be able to take that one? Thank you so much. Catherine Weldon, you can go ahead when you're ready. Catherine, you are self-muted at the moment, so you can start whenever you're ready.
Yeah, I was just curious, has anybody been looking at Santa Margarita River and dredging, starting to add that to the Oceanside?
I see you've unmuted yourself, but we can't hear you.
Oh,
Can we come back to her, Francesca?
Yeah, sure. Let's go ahead and take member comment and then I'll try again afterward. Catherine, sorry.
Thanks for coming here. Thanks for the presentation. We were following your tax measure closely in the city of Encinitas. We too had a tax measure. It failed. We only needed 50+1. Didn't get it either. But I was observing your social media and it was so well done the way that it was being communicated exactly what the problem is and what the efforts are. And it really did such a great job, I think, of getting the information out to a lot of people about you know, there's one way to solve this and it's with money. And so just kudos to you for that, because that's not an easy thing to be able to do from a city's perspective, and also to get the grassroots advocacy to be so supportive of it. So nice job, and I'm sorry, and I hope it's successful next time.
Yeah, so too, I think that's a really important point. I don't think people realize how important, not how important, but how expensive beach nourishment is. Just that 37,000 cubic yards, which is really quite a small project, was $2 million. And there's very little funding for that. It's surprising, but there's very little funding from that from either the Coastal Commission or the state lands or anyone else. It's pretty much, it literally came out of our general fund. There's little opportunities for funding that kind of project. Very expensive.
Councilor Zio?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for the presentation. Good to see you, Leslie. It's been really fun working with you guys, albeit, as you mentioned, over a long period of time. I guess the first question is, was there any, being the beneficiary of getting our beach expanded a little bit sooner because of the problems that San Clemente ran into, was there any post-mortem done to understand what went wrong and how the first borrow site was incorrectly identified as being a good site? I mean, do we know how to avoid that in the future at this point? I don't know if either of you know that.
I'll answer the politically, and then
Okay.
Leslie, I can give you the real story. I think what happened is that the borrow site, which is just north of the harbor and Oceanside, is very large. And there were a lot of different test sites. And in fact, I think SANDAG actually did some of them as well. And we're not convinced that they used the best potential location in that borrow site. And we think that there might have been the wrong equipment being used. It was a hopper dredge. Perhaps it should have been a clamshell dredge. So it was maybe a mixture of equipment and maybe just missing the mark. It's amazing how much the surface of the sand can change in just maybe a kilometer or two. And I think we just missed it. Maybe there's a more technical answer, but.
I would just add on to that we do know that the LA district is going to be looking into the site. Obviously, they built a 50-year project on that borrow site. So the reason they did that is because a lot of their vibrocores showed beach quality sand in certain areas. So to Andy's point, I think they might have been looking in the wrong department, but the postmortem is still to be conducted, and we are hoping soon.
Yeah, I'd be interested in that. And this is for my own edification, a little bit of clarification. You were talking about the other project getting free sand. I mean, I don't know how that's defined, given that we just went out to the sea and grabbed our sand. So when you say, I assume, which also and technically is free, we just got it from a borrow site, but when you sent free sand for the other project, did that mean that they didn't have to pay for the dredging of it? Or what does free sand mean versus like what Solana Beach was, which is we just went out to a borrow site and grabbed free sand, quote unquote?
Yeah, that's a good question. So for example, in Solana Beach a couple of years ago, there was, I think, the Solana 101 project, the Sandbox project, and then there was Solana Highlands. So some of those projects have like a cost associated with them to acquire the sand or to truck it. Or you can get sand from an upland quarry and pay a per cubic yard price. So in this case, it was sorted and stockpiled and given to the city at no cost.
Yep, maybe just add to that. It came from the Santa Ana River. As you know, most of the rivers in Orange County are concrete, and so they have to get rid of the sediment. And so that they were looking to get rid of it, and we were looking to put it on the beach. So they said it's yours.
Yeah, it works out well from that perspective. And I noticed some and again, my numbers are in my head, so they could be entirely wrong. But I noticed that it seemed to be some pretty big disparities. My recollection is that between Solana Beach and Encinitas, we got about 1 million cubic yards. And that was for somewhere between $30 to $35 million, which seems a lot cheaper than $120 million for 2 million cubic yards. So, I mean, I don't, do we know what's influencing the cost factors here?
Oh, so just for context, that $120 million that we're showing there is the 50-year project cost.
Right, yeah. And is that $2 million per, well, I assume the 2 million cubic yards is the entire sand over 50 years, but or is that, we're just expecting inflation and it's
We're expecting inflation, absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
And that's based on that 50-year cost estimate that the Army Corps provided.
Okay.
And I'm not sure what the number is for Solana Beach offhand.
It's about the same. I think it was about 150 million, so a little bit more for 10 years. And this is annual, so are you expecting that their needs will be to replace annually? Because I think again in ours, Encinitas is every 5 years, Solana Beach is every 10 years.
Yes.
5 to 6.
And right, exactly. So we're hoping in the future that San Clemente and Encinitas can sync up every time a renourishment event is planned, and then Solana Beach would get looped in every other time.
Right. Okay. Yeah. And I just think, you know, it's never been entirely clear to me, and something as we're doing these regional studies that would be interesting is what is the deciding factor about these renourishing cycles and initial placement? I mean, Solana Beach initially was supposed, and Encinitas, you know, was supposed to place more, and there were things that came into play. And I'm not sure I have entire clarity on exactly that. But if there's, you know, there's clearly, if we want to have a regional effort, having optimizations about replacement cycles and understand what makes sense would be helpful, that I'm probably lacking a little bit of understanding still. Thanks.
Yeah, and you know, maybe just, we wanted to make sure that we're watching everything that's going on. We've seen a lot more. We've seen our beach come alive again. We had a grunion run that was much larger than what we've had in the past. We've seen the benefits of having sand on the beach again, the environmental benefits. And so, you know, I think it's important that it's not just how quickly the sand goes away, but the other benefits we've seen, you know, wildlife or grunions or whatever, how fast do they go away, and how often do we need to keep our beaches healthy?
Other comments from the members or questions? All right. Yes, Mitch.
Thanks for that really interesting presentation. It's really, I guess, cool to see all the parallels that are happening in San Clemente versus in San Diego County. This might be a little off topic, but I just wanted to ask, I guess, in, you know, at least in your opinion, in San Clemente, just because, you know, 10 years ago in San Diego, we have a train problem too. I have a train in Del Mar that's in a, you know, bad place for sea level rise. And it just seemed like almost impossible to move that train maybe a decade ago, but now it's happening. Like there's actually a process. SANDAG is leading the process. And so, you know, obviously the low sand corridor in Orange County is bigger and longer, and it'd be a much more colossal project than an already colossal project here. But is OCTA talking about that yet? You know, I agree that sand is better than throwing boulders through emergency permits, and Surfrider, we've been hammering that point at the Coastal Commission for a long time. But I was just curious as to, like, I guess San Clemente's perspective. You know, is there community support for that? Is there city council support for that? At least, you know, a resolution or something like that, and then also just OCTA's kind of long-term planning if they're thinking about that yet. Thanks.
Yeah, the OCTA is currently doing a study to see if the railroad tracks can be moved. Hopefully there'll be some different dynamics. I think this is the third time they've studied that, and the first two kind of indicated it was infeasible just because, I'm sorry, inland in Orange County through San Clemente gets very hilly and it gets very difficult of where you can put the tracks. But I think that they have some new technologies and some other things they're looking at this time, but there is an ongoing study about whether or not the tracks can be relocated. As far as the city's perspective, you know, I've only been there for a couple of years now, but I've been surprised how much the citizens actually like the train. You know, they all stand up on the bluff and wave at it when they go by right there in the Pier Bowl, and it's kind of Rockwellian a little bit, but it's kind of interesting how much the residents actually like the train when it comes through. Well, they don't like the train horn, but they like the train. So it's kind of an interesting.
It's worse for erosion purposes that it's close to the beach. It doesn't cut the community in half like it does.
Correct. That's a really good point. That's correct.
Any other questions, comments? Mr. Joyce?
So, sorry, this is a little off, but it's kind of bridging off the comments that came on the cycle of replenishment that we talked about. And I just wanted to put another plug in for considering purchasing the barge, because I think we have these finite years that we're doing the replenishment, but the conditions change so fast. And like you said, like, you know, in 17, that beach was not a problem. And then 4 years later, it's not there. And some of that stuff we're not going to be able to account for. And if we have the system in place where we can be responsive on the go, and we're not having to fit within the systems of some other private organizations already laid plans and we're able to be responsive in the moment, I think that's definitely the best path forward. So just another, when we're thinking about that consideration, thinking about our responsiveness time and the need that we're going to have. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's important to note that one of the real challenges when we tried to kickstart the program after we got the cobble at the beginning and kickstart it again, you were really dealing with essentially a monopoly. There was only one company that even bid. There was only one company interested in doing it. And so beyond the costs of not having any bidding pressure, it was just the timing when you've only got one person that's trying to do everything from the Columbia River all the way down to Imperial Beach. It's just that makes it difficult. We certainly would be interested in having that conversation with you.
I would just like to add that issue of to buy a dredge or to not buy a dredge has been asked before. The County of Orange conducted a study, I believe it was 2007, 2008. Division of Boating and Waterways at State Parks also asked the same question and commissioned a study. And I think both of those studies, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think those were prepared by Moffitt and Nickel. We have those studies. We can send them to Keith if he doesn't already have them, and those could be shared with the group. Now, they're obviously outdated in terms of when they were conducted, and maybe they need to be dusted off and reevaluated. But I don't think we're starting from scratch on asking that question. So perhaps there's more momentum there, as Keith indicated earlier. That's something we're going to be looking at.
We're definitely looking at that. And we're also looking at a larger context. So just one county buying a dredge would have a lot of downtime. You have to store it, you have to maintain it, you have to have people that work on it when it goes out. But instead of just one county, what if it's the 5 Southern California counties? What if it's from Santa Barbara all the way south of the border? So we have established this year, and I'll talk about it more in your next meeting, about the Southern California Sand Collaborative. It's the 5 Southern California cities. Ms. Meyerhoff is on that group with us. And it's gathering together all of our counterparts up and down Southern California with the idea of how do we leverage each other's, ability to go out and get funding, to get resources and utilize those resources across Southern California so that there's no downtime of that dredge. It's more of a cycle. So it's just the early stages of that. And I'd love to report out more about it at your next meeting. Any final questions, comments? Well, I want to thank everybody. The next meeting will be on Thursday, March 6th.
I'm so sorry. Could we go back to the public commenter to see if
Sure, Francesca.
her microphone will work? All right, Catherine, go ahead if you're ready. All right, Catherine, I'm going to ask that you please email your comments to me, and I would be happy to distribute them to the committee on your behalf. My email is clerk@sandag.org, and I'll make sure that your comments get to everybody on the committee.
Thanks, Francesca. So the next meeting is Thursday, March 6th. This meeting is adjourned. Who I get to use this? Ooh, nice.